I never thought I'd be the guy to approach someone crying at a bar, but there I was, nursing a half-empty beer, watching this stranger lose it in what looked like a pretty intense way. It was one of those nights where you don't really plan on meeting anyone, let alone sharing someone else's pain, but sometimes life just throws that curveball. So picture this. It's a Friday night, and I'm at this little dive bar near my apartment. Nothing fancy, just a few old booths, a jukebox that mostly plays 80s rock, and a bartender named Marty who knows everyone by name, and probably their business too. I was there mostly to forget a crappy week, hoping the noise and crowd would drown out the usual overthinking. I'd been scrolling through my phone, trying to look casual, when I noticed this guy sitting alone at the end of the bar, shoulders hunched, eyes red and glistening. Not the usual sad because my team lost kind of look. No, this was something deeper, like the kind of sadness that makes your throat tight and your hands shake a little. He wasn't trying to hide it though. Every few minutes he'd rub his eyes, sniff, and then take a long, shaky breath, like he was trying to hold himself together but failing. I felt a strange pull. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe just plain human empathy. So I wiped my own damp eyes. Yeah, I'm a softie, what can I say, and slid down a stool a bit closer. I wasn't planning to say anything, just be nearby, but then he turned toward me and without a word asked, "Mind if I sit here?" That simple question threw me for a loop. It wasn't some pickup line or small talk. It was raw and immediate, like he needed company more than anything else. So I nodded, and he shifted over, clutching his glass like it was a lifeline. The bartender gave me a look that said, "Good luck, buddy," and poured me another beer. His name was Jamie. He told me that after we'd been sitting together for a while, though not right away. At first, we just shared the silence, the kind that feels heavy but not awkward. I learned there was something about how he carried his grief, and how open he was with it, that pulled me in. I don't know what I expected from that night, but I sure as hell didn't expect to end up talking to someone who looked like they'd been through hell, and still managed to crack a smile when I shared the dumbest joke I knew. And just when I thought I might have to walk away and leave him to his tears, that's when he started telling me the story behind them. That's when everything changed. Jamie's story started slow, like he was dipping his toes into cold water before fully jumping in. He took a long sip from his glass and leaned back, eyes fixed on some distant point behind the bar. "It's dumb, really," he said, voice low and a little shaky. "I mean, it's just a guy, but he was my guy." I nodded, not saying anything, just letting him keep going. He wasn't someone who looked like he'd be into the whole romantic heartbreak scene. Short hair, casual clothes, a kind of rough around the edges vibe. But there he was, raw and real, peeling back layers I hadn't expected to find in a stranger. "We were together for almost 3 years," he said. "I thought we were good, like really good. I mean, yeah, we fought sometimes, but isn't that normal? I thought we could work through it." He swallowed hard, and I could tell the memory was sharp and fresh. Then last week, out of nowhere, he tells me he's done. Just like that. Said he needed space, whatever that means. Didn't give me any warning, no chance to fix anything. I'm no expert on breakups, but I've had my share, and I could see the familiar ache behind his words. The kind that makes your chest feel heavy, and your mind spin with all the what-ifs and whys. But Jamie was different. He wasn't just sad. There was a kind of stunned disbelief in his eyes, like he still couldn't quite wrap his head around it. "So you're here, drowning your sorrows?" I asked, trying for a light tone. The last thing I wanted was for this to turn into one of those awkward pity sessions. He chuckled, a short, dry sound. "Yeah, I guess that's exactly what I'm doing, but it's more than that. It's like, I don't even know who I am without him. We built a whole life together, or at least, I thought we did. Now it feels like I'm just drifting, with no anchor." There was something about his honesty that caught me off guard. Most people try to hide their vulnerabilities, especially guys. But Jamie just laid it all out there. No filter. It made me want to reach out, to say something to make it better, though I knew words were useless in moments like this. I told him about my own recent mess of a breakup, not as a competition, but because sometimes sharing your own crap makes the other person feel less alone. We talked about the weird, painful silence after someone leaves, the night spent staring at your phone, the gut-wrenching mix of hope and despair that you might get a text saying it was all a mistake. The bar started to thin out as the night went on, the jukebox switching to some slower songs. Marty gave us a nod from behind the counter, like he knew something important was happening but didn't want to interrupt. Jamie's posture softened a bit, and I caught a flicker of something that looked a lot like relief. Not because I was some kind of miracle cure, but just because he wasn't alone anymore, even if just for a couple of hours. At some point, Jamie surprised me by making a joke about how bad the bar's bathroom was, and I laughed harder than I had in weeks. That's when I realized this wasn't just a random sad guy at a bar. I was sitting next to someone who might actually be worth knowing. We talked about everything and nothing, favorite movies, dumb childhood memories, the kind of music that makes you feel understood. It felt easy, like slipping into a comfortable rhythm without trying too hard. I found myself wanting to know more, to see if this feeling could stretch beyond one night, beyond a shared moment of sorrow. But then, just as I was starting to think maybe I could get used to this, Jamie's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face shifted again, that look of pain creeping back in. I saw him hesitate, then slide the phone back into his pocket without a word. "Bad news?" I asked gently. He shook his head, but his voice was tight. "No, just stuff I'm not ready to deal with yet." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a breakup. There was something else beneath the surface, something more complicated. And for whatever reason, I wanted to stick around to find out what it was. So I said, nodding toward the door as the last call was announced, "You gonna be okay getting home?" Jamie shrugged, a small smile trying to break through. "I think so. Thanks for sitting with me." "Anytime," I said, surprising myself with how genuine it sounded. "Maybe next time, you can buy me a drink instead." He chuckled, and for the first time that night, the sadness in his eyes was mingled with something lighter. Hope, maybe. Or at least the possibility of it. And honestly, that was enough to keep me around. We left the bar together, stepping out into the cool night air, the city still buzzing around us. It was one of those rare moments when the world feels both incredibly vast and strangely intimate, like you and this random guy just dropped into someone else's movie and became the main characters, even if just for a scene. Jamie lit a cigarette, and I realized I hadn't seen him do that once inside. Maybe the bar had a no-smoking rule, or maybe it was just the kind of habit that sneaks back out when the weight of everything is too much. So I said, exhaling and trying to keep things casual, "What's your usual move after a breakup?" "Cry in public, or am I just lucky to catch the full show?" He laughed, the sound rough but genuine, which made me smile in return. "Usually, I just hole up at home and binge watch something sad, but tonight, I don't know. Something about the bar, or maybe just the loneliness, made me want to reach out, even if it was just to sit next to someone." We started walking, no real destination, just moving with the city's rhythm. Jamie's stories came out in fits and starts. He talked about the apartment they shared, now feeling emptier than ever, the little routines that suddenly didn't make sense anymore. He mentioned their dog, a scruffy terrier named Max, who was probably just as confused about the change as he was. "I'm supposed to take care of Max now," he said, shaking his head. "But honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready to be responsible for anything right now." I nodded, feeling that same heaviness from my own past, knowing how hard it was to be the one left picking up the pieces. Still, there was something about Jamie's openness that made it easier to share those thoughts. Maybe it's because when someone's this raw, there's less room for pretense. We ended up at a little 24-hour diner, one of those greasy spoon places with flickering neon signs, and a menu that's clearly unchanged since the 70s. We slid into a booth, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and a wobbly table, and ordered coffee and eggs, both of us barely able to focus on eating. Instead, we talked about the kind of future Jamie thought he'd lost, and the one I was desperately trying to build for myself. He surprised me when he asked about my own story, what had led me to that bar that night, feeling as lost as he did now. I gave him the short version, a messy breakup, a couple of months of awkward dating attempts, and a general feeling of being stuck. Sharing that, in that dim little diner, felt oddly freeing, like admitting you're broken in front of a stranger somehow makes the cracks easier to bear. At some point, Jamie reached across the table and just lightly touched my hand. It wasn't sudden or flashy, more like a quiet acknowledgement that he wasn't as alone as he thought. I didn't pull away. Instead, I squeezed his hand back and realized how much I wanted to be the guy who helped him find his footing again. The night stretched on, and the diner's few other patrons trickled out, leaving us with the hum of the neon sign and the clinking of dishes being cleaned. Jamie's eyes were brighter now, less haunted, though the pain was still there, like a shadow he was learning to live with. He told me about the plans he'd made, the places he wanted to visit once he felt strong enough, the books he wanted to read to distract himself. When we finally stepped back outside, the first hints of dawn were breaking, softening the sharp edges of the night. Jamie lit another cigarette, and we stood there in silence, the city waking up around us. "Thank you," he said quietly, flicking the cigarette away, "for everything tonight. For not just walking away." I smiled, pulling my jacket tighter against the morning chill. "You'd do the same for me, or I hope you would." He looked at me then, really looked, like he was trying to memorize the way the light hit my face. "Maybe we both got a little lucky tonight." I nodded, the weight in my chest feeling lighter, like maybe, just maybe, this unexpected night was the start of something new, something neither of us saw coming when we first met at that bar. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see where it'd go from here. After that first impromptu night, Jamie and I started seeing each other more. Not in a let's jump into a relationship way, but more like two people who needed someone to lean on. We'd grab coffee on slow Sunday mornings or meet up after work just to trade stories about the day. He never tried to rush anything, and honestly, neither did I. There was something refreshing about not having to pretend or put on a show. We could just be two messed up guys figuring shit out in real time. One evening, about a week after that night at the diner, Jamie invited me over to his apartment. I was nervous at first, the kind of nervous that makes your palms sweat and your brain go into overdrive thinking about all the possible awkward scenarios. But when I got there, it was just him. And Max, who immediately claimed me as his new best friend by barking and wagging his tail like crazy. His place was small, cluttered with books and old records, but it had this cozy vibe, like a little sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world. Jamie made coffee while I sat on the couch, watching as he unpacked a box labeled Memories, with a slightly hesitant smile. Inside were photo albums, ticket stubs, little notes, pieces of his past life that he hadn't quite figured out what to do with now that the guy who shared it all was gone. We didn't talk about the breakup right away. Instead, Jamie put on some music, a mix of indie rock and slow ballads, and we just hung out, the kind of silence that feels comfortable rather than forced. At one point, Max jumped up beside me, resting his head on my knee, and I reached down to scratch behind his ears. It was a simple moment, but it felt like the first real connection since everything had fallen apart for Jamie. Later, we ended up on the tiny balcony, looking out over the city lights. Jamie lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly, the smoke curling in the chilly air. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd be the kind of person to meet someone like you in a bar of all places." I laughed softly. "Yeah, me neither. Bars usually just give me hangovers and bad decisions." He smiled, the kind that reaches the eyes and makes you forget everything else for a moment. "I guess sometimes the best things come from the worst nights." That stuck with me. It felt like a quiet promise, a seed of hope planted in the middle of all the mess we were both dealing with. We kept talking, sharing little pieces of ourselves, the kind you don't just toss out on a first date, but that you reveal when you trust someone enough to see the cracks. And trust wasn't easy for Jamie. I could tell by the way he sometimes hesitated before answering, or the way his eyes would dart away when things got too personal. But I didn't push. I wanted him to open up on his own terms. One night, a few weeks later, we were watching an old movie at his place. Max was curled up on the floor, and Jamie had his arm around me. I could feel the steady warmth of his body, the kind that makes you forget about the cold realities outside. Halfway through the film, Jamie shifted and looked at me, something serious in his gaze. "I'm scared," he said quietly. It caught me off guard. "About what?" about all of this, about letting someone in again, about getting hurt, about losing myself. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. I get that. More than you know. But maybe we don't have to be scared together. He smiled then, small but genuine, and leaned in closer. Maybe you're right. That moment felt like crossing a line. Not the kind where everything changes overnight, but one where you acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, there's something worth holding on to. Something worth fighting for. From then on, things weren't perfect. We had our ups and downs, moments where the past crept in and threatened to pull us back into the dark. But we faced them together. I watched Jamie heal, piece by piece, and I found myself healing too. One rainy afternoon, we were sitting in that same diner where we first talked for hours. Jamie looked at me, eyes shining with a mix of vulnerability and hope. "You really saved me, you know," he said. "Not just that night at the bar, but everything after." I shrugged, smiling. Guess we saved each other. And in that moment, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the hum of life outside, I realized this wasn't just some random encounter. It was the start of something real, something neither of us expected, but both of us needed more than we knew. After that day in the diner, things between Jamie and me slowly settled into a rhythm that felt normal. Or as normal as it could be when you're two guys who met through tears and late-night conversations. We'd text each other about dumb stuff, meet up for drinks, or take Max to the park. I started to see the little things that made Jamie who he was. The way he'd laugh at his own jokes, how he got unreasonably competitive over board games, and that quiet intensity when he talked about the things he cared about. One weekend, Jamie invited me to a small art show his friend was hosting. I wasn't familiar with that scene, but I wanted to be there for him, to be part of his world beyond the pain. The gallery was tucked away in a converted warehouse, filled with abstract paintings and sculptures that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. Jamie's friend, a tall woman with vibrant hair and a contagious laugh, introduced me to a few people. I could see Jamie relax in that crowd, his eyes lighting up when he talked about the pieces. At one point, Jamie pulled me aside, his voice low but steady. "Thanks for coming. It means a lot." I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. "I like seeing this side of you." He looked a little surprised, but didn't say anything more. Instead, he took my hand, weaving our fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, walking home under streetlights and a sky heavy with stars, something shifted between us. The easy camaraderie turned into something deeper, a quiet understanding that we were ready to try. I could feel the tension in Jamie relax, like he was finally allowing himself to hope again. But hope is a fragile thing, especially when you've been hurt before. A few days later, Jamie got a call. It was from his ex. I didn't pry, but I could see the way his jaw tightened and his eyes flicked away as he answered. When he hung up, he looked drained, like the weight of the past had slammed back into the present. "I didn't expect that," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I reached over, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "Want to talk about it?" He shook his head. "Not yet. I'm just trying to keep my head above water." I understood. Sometimes, the ghosts of what's been don't just disappear because you want them to. They show up when you least expect it, threatening to undo everything you've built. Over the next few weeks, Jamie seemed distant at times, caught between the pain of old wounds and the complicated feelings of something new. I tried to be patient, telling myself that healing wasn't a straight line. But there were moments when I wondered if I'd misread things, if I was just a rebound or a temporary distraction. One evening, we were sitting on his couch, the room lit only by the soft glow of a lamp. Max was asleep at our feet. Jamie was scrolling through his phone, face unreadable. Finally, he looked up. "I'm scared, you know. Scared that I'll never really move on. That this, whatever we have, is just gonna fall apart." I took his hand, squeezing gently. "I'm scared too, but maybe that's okay. Maybe being scared means you care." He smiled, a little wry but genuine. "You always know what to say." I laughed softly. "I'm full of surprises." We sat there for a while, the silence between us comfortable like an old sweater. Then Jamie leaned his head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around him. It wasn't some grand declaration or dramatic moment. It was just two guys, trying to figure out how to be there for each other. As the weeks turned into months, we kept navigating the messy, complicated space between heartbreak and hope. There were setbacks, nights when Jamie's doubts swallowed him whole, days when I felt helpless watching him struggle. But there were also breakthroughs, small victories like a genuine laugh, a touch that lingered, a promise whispered in the dark. One afternoon, Jamie surprised me by showing up at my apartment with a beat-up guitar and a tentative smile. "I've been trying to write something," he said. "Want to hear it?" I nodded, heart pounding a little. He sat down and started playing, the notes raw and imperfect but full of feeling. The song wasn't about the past or the pain. It was about finding light in the darkness, about holding on even when the world feels like it's falling apart. When he finished, I pulled him into a hug, feeling the fragility and strength wrapped up in that moment. "We're gonna be okay," I whispered. Jamie looked up, eyes shining. "Yeah, we are." After that night with the guitar, something between Jamie and me shifted in a quiet but meaningful way. It wasn't like we suddenly had everything figured out, but the cracks weren't as sharp anymore, and the weight felt a little lighter when we were together. We kept spending time together, discovering little rituals that became ours. Morning coffees on his cluttered balcony, Sunday brunches at that greasy spoon diner, and late-night talks where the city skyline was the only witness. One chilly Saturday, Jamie suggested we take Max for a hike just outside the city. I wasn't much of an outdoors guy, but I was willing to try if it meant more time with him. We packed a small bag with snacks, leashes, and a thermos of coffee and drove out to a trail Jamie had been to a few times. The air was fresh, crisp with that unmistakable smell of pine and earth, a welcome change from the concrete and noise we usually lived with. Max ran ahead, ears flapping as he chased a squirrel, and Jamie and I walked side by side, the silence between us comfortable rather than tense. At one point, he stopped and looked up at the sky, the soft light filtering through the trees. "I missed this," he said quietly. "Just being outside, away from everything." I nodded, understanding completely. Sometimes it's the quiet that does the healing. He glanced at me then, eyes reflecting that same vulnerability I'd come to know and care about. "You're different, you know? Not like anyone else I've met in a long time." I smiled, feeling warmth spread through my chest. "I'll take that as a compliment." We reached a clearing with a small stream, and Jamie sat down on a smooth rock, patting the space beside him. I joined him, and for a while, we just watched the water ripple, neither of us needing to fill the silence. "Can I ask you something?" Jamie said finally. "Shoot, why did you stay that night? When I was crying at the bar." I thought for a moment, surprised by the question. I guess I saw someone who was hurting, and I didn't want him to be alone. Plus, there was something about you. Like you weren't just sad, but also still fighting. I wanted to be part of that fight, even if I didn't know what it meant yet. Jamie looked at me then, a slow smile spreading. "I'm glad you did." That moment felt like a turning point. We were no longer just two broken people crossing paths. We were something more, something fragile but real. I reached out and took his hand, fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. The days that followed were a mix of highs and lows, like any real thing worth having. There were moments when Jamie would retreat into himself, the past casting long shadows, but there were also moments of light. Planning a weekend getaway, dancing awkwardly in his living room, or just sitting close enough that the world outside faded away. One night, as we lay tangled in his bed, the city's hum a distant lullaby, Jamie whispered, "I'm scared about what's next." About opening up all the way. I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Me too. But maybe we don't have to have all the answers right now." He smiled, that soft, tired smile that made me want to protect him from everything. "Yeah, just you and me. For now." And that was enough. Months later, we found ourselves back at the bar where it all began. It was quieter this time, almost like the place was holding its breath, waiting. Jamie nudged me as we sat down, his eyes bright with mischief. Remember how I was a mess that night? I laughed. You're still a mess, but a lovable one. He grinned, and for the first time, I felt something shift completely, not just between us, but inside me. Like all the pain, the fear, the loneliness had led to this moment where I could finally say, without hesitation, that I was falling for him. Jamie caught my eye and raised his glass. To second chances. I clinked mine against his, feeling the warmth spread through my veins. To us. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. We were okay. We were more than okay. We were home. A few weeks after that toast at the bar, Jamie and I found ourselves sitting on his balcony again, the same one where we'd first opened up to each other about fears and futures that felt uncertain. The city lights twinkled below, and Max was curled up at our feet, snoring softly. Jamie turned to me, his eyes reflecting the gentle glow of the street lamps and something deeper. Something steady, like he'd finally found solid ground. You know, he said quietly, I never thought I'd get here, not really. I thought the past would always be this weight dragging me down. I smiled, brushing my fingers over his hand. I get that. I was scared too. But look at us. He laughed softly, a real, easy sound. Yeah, us. We sat in comfortable silence for a bit, just soaking in the moment. There was no grand gesture, no big announcement, just two people who'd been through a lot, choosing to be there for each other anyway. It felt like the kind of peace you don't always find, but when you do, you recognize it immediately. Jamie leaned his head on my shoulder, and I tightened my arm around him. Thanks for sticking around, he whispered. I shrugged, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the evening chill. Who else would I be crazy enough to sit with on a night like that? He smiled against me. Crazy, yeah, but the best kind. That simple exchange, the quiet gratitude, the shared laughter, the comfort in knowing we'd found each other, felt like the real beginning. Not a fairy tale, not some perfect ending, but something honest and raw and alive. We both had scars. We both had fears. But in that moment, none of that mattered as much as the truth that we had something worth holding on to. Something built not on promises of forever, but on the willingness to show up every day, to choose each other even when it's hard. As the city hummed below us, I realized that sometimes love isn't fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes it's just two people sitting side by side, quietly healing together, and that, more than anything, felt like home.